Yeah, so as Sven said, I'm actually not going to ruin your day. Because sometimes you have these privacy talks and they're all doom and terrible and GDPR and horrible, nothing is possible. And this is actually in a way a worse presentation because it should give you a lot to think about. And with some luck, you're still thinking about this tomorrow. I'm talking to you here as a software developer. But you might get a bit confused because I have a rather wild career. So indeed, I founded PowerDNS, which is a name server that many people use, open source. Some of you might know me from the article Reverse Engineering the Source Code of the BioNTech Pfizer vaccine, which 2 million software developers apparently want to read about. I worked for an intelligence agency. So I wasn't a spy. Most people working at intelligence agencies aren't spies. But I was not a bookkeeper either. So I was heavily involved with hacking stuff. And because it was a rather small intelligence agency at the time, you could do all kinds of things. So I also helped write some legislation. I did some real spying stuff. So it was very serious work and very fun. And I had gained a lot of experience there with what does it mean to eavesdrop on people and to do surveillance and signals intelligence. Then I did various other things. And eventually I joined the board that decides for the 2 Dutch intelligence agencies if they are allowed to hack people or organizations or servers. And every time they wanted to do that, our little committee had to say yes or no. And I think that adds a little bit of value because sometimes you get a talk on privacy by someone that is studying privacy from their desk at university, which can be real nice. I worked at university, I did research there. But it's a rather different question if someone comes to you with a piece of paper and says, hey, we want to hack this large company for national security. Is it okay, Bert? It makes it a rather personal thing. And because of that rather personal thing, I think I can maybe share some thoughts about our role as software developers in the world of national security, privacy, crime prevention. The nice thing about the Dutch government is you can agree with them in a huge way and resign from this committee that tells the intelligence agencies what to do because they want to pass a law that says that they can do a lot more. But the Dutch government does not do revenge somehow. So I currently work for the electoral board, the kiesraad, where I help make our elections robust. We have a new job opening. So that's the only thing I'm going to say. So if you're looking for a job and you like elections, talk to me. This was this committee. And it consists of 2 judges, which is the one with the white things, and 1 non-official judge, and that was me. And that's a unique thing in the world. Almost everywhere in the world, when they say we want to keep close track of how these intelligence agencies are hacking everything, so we hired this lawyer that doesn't have a computer to keep track of what they're doing, which doesn't work. They did this in Germany famously, for example. And in the Netherlands, for some reason, someone had a good moment and they said, no, we need an actual nerd on that board. And there have now been 3 nerds in that position, and all of them have been like really good nerds. If I consider myself a good nerd. I think I do. So that was a lot of fun. So where there I had to actually say yes and no. I learned a lot, which I cannot tell you anything about. I can also, the jokes, I could tell you, but I'd have to kill you, but it doesn't work like that in the Netherlands. So I could tell you, and then I would go to jail. That's sort of our, don't ask. Please don't ask. So I resigned, and that made the news. But I need to stop talking about myself now. I do not speak on behalf of the Dutch government, just so you know. Even though I work for them, I'm here on my own. So, what is it with data? And that's leaking. We leak a ton of data. And the amount of data that comes out of apps and that comes out of software, that comes out of phones or general devices is now so large and traded so heavily that in a recent review, the US intelligence agencies, which are like 100 times larger than ours, said, yeah, you can buy, the kind of stuff you can buy online about people is now sort of comparable to the information we get from actual spying on people. That's a very scary thought, because that goes 2 ways. One, now we know how much spying the real agencies do, and it also confirms that the advertising people are doing a similar amount. That's big. That's big, all that data. And in many places, it's even sort of semi-legal or just entirely legal to go to a so-called data broker And there you can tell, well, I would like to target the following kinds of people. And you can say, well, people who are recently pregnant, and or people interested in abortion services. And those can be targeted now in the US. And they found you can easily order a list of these people and start prosecuting them. So the leaking of data is not just from, well, you shouldn't have any secrets anyhow. There are many people like, I don't care, you can leak all my data all you want because I have no secrets. And then I always say that's a bit selfish because maybe I do have secrets. And I bet you do as well. But it's not just inconvenient that people leak your data, it could actually land you in jail or get you killed. Yeah, in Texas you can now make $10,000 if you hire a data broker to figure out something who's trying to have an abortion. This is a weird... So, this is obviously a very bad situation. That we have data brokers that can now target everyone based on their shoe size or the kind of car they have or what kind of job they have, where they live, where they want to live, if they're interested in certain chemicals. It's all on the market now. And that market is huge. And it's terrible. And whose fault is this? Whose fault is this? Well, they got that data from us. Every piece of software that collected your location or blood pressure or monetary details all came out of a piece of software written by software developers. So this is a terrible situation and we typed it in. That's not good. Now, of course, there are many reasons to feel, well, that's not entirely our fault. And who is responsible for things? So I studied physics. I didn't finish physics, but I still love physics. And the physicist people, they are still sort of dealing with the fact that they invented the atomic bomb. We're still a bit hungover about that. So when you study physics in the Netherlands, you get an ethics course that tells you just how to think about inventing the atomic bomb. It doesn't literally say that it was bad, though. It just gives you a way to think about it. So this is the famous picture. The person that presses the button nuke and launches the nuclear attack, they are definitely responsible because they pressed the button. I'm not some kind of supreme ethicist or something or a philosopher, but I think this person, you could call them responsible because they pressed the button. Next up is a scene from the extremely good movie War Games. If you haven't seen it, you should see it tonight. And this guy, he sits in the nuclear bunker. He launches the missiles because he's been ordered to launch the missiles by the United States president. He's not as responsible as the guy that pressed the nuke button because he was ordered to do this stuff. It's his job. If he didn't do it, someone else would do it. So this person is not as responsible. But we can go a little bit further down the chain. This is the atom bomb factory in the US. And it's a very normal business. It's very strange. It's called the Pentax plant. And they're a very enthusiastic group of people. And they have marathons they run, charities. And they assemble nuclear weapons. And it's a job. Apparently, this is just a job. But these people, yeah, they can say, I only assembled the nuclear bomb. It's not my decision to actually launch it. And very interesting, by the way, you have a very important green energy program at the Pentax plant. So they're saving the world before they might destroy it. It's a real fun Twitter account to follow, Pentax plant. They have pride events and stuff. Like, you can be whatever you want at Pentax, as long as you're okay with destroying the world. These people also should have ethics talks, but anyhow. And you can go further away. These are the people that make uranium centrifuges. On the right, that's an actual uranium mine. Are the people working at the uranium mine responsible for the nuclear bomb? I don't know. Are the people making the machines that work there, are they responsible? You could use those machines anywhere. And on the right is Lise Meitner, the inventor of nuclear fission, or at least the discoverer. And she discovered that a very long time ago. And she didn't know about the atomic bomb, so I'm not sure if we should hold her responsible. So anyway, we're in a nice nuclear state of mind now. And data is not a nuclear weapon. Let's be very clear about that. We are not talking here about if you are personally launching a nuclear weapon and if your code is involved with that. But if too much data leaks, you can empower a sort of Chinese-style level dictatorship, which is also not good. So I wouldn't say that we're on the same level as the people that make atomic bombs, but we still have something to think about. And the sad truth is that most evil is done by people who never make up their minds to do evil or not. And this is someone who studied evil her whole life, so she should know. And this goes for a lot of technology, where you say, look, I just type it in. I don't spend too much time thinking about it, and I don't have to think about it. And maybe I did just enable the Chinese government to track everyone around the world, but it's not, yeah, I just type it in. And it's very easy to do that, and it's also not very strange to do that. Because if you start thinking about, I'm launching nuclear weapons all day long, you don't get a lot of code committed. But here is what is going on. This is sort of the modern world, where we have two people downstairs. They are smiling because they don't know about the rest of the picture. And whenever they communicate with each other, tons of records are being kept. So they send a message to each other on the Facebook Messenger. And in the big database, there's a log at what time of day they did that, which device they did it on, how fast they were typing, what the previous page they were looking at was, their recent search history. That's all logged in the big database. Facebook and Google, but almost every company are actually full of these databases, logging the world. And it's more than you think, because it doesn't just include the logging that you yourself do. If you use some kind of Facebook framework, for example, then by default it will start logging all kinds of things to Facebook that you never consciously turned on, but it is happening. And then what happens with that database? Advertising services make use of that. They collect a ton of this data by adding little pixels to every page. The frameworks, Google, Meta, do a lot. And these handshake guys on top of there, those are the data brokers. There are companies where you will not easily find their names. They have hidden domain names. But if you go to a modern website and you open the network console and you see the 1,000 connections that are generated even on visiting a simple website, many of the domain names in there are anonymous. You don't know what they are. And they don't want you to know what they are, but these are the data brokers that sit in between. And these data brokers are so sure that what they are doing is legal that they registered their domain name on the Virgin Islands somewhere, which gives you a sign that maybe they're not entirely sure if it's legal. And the scope of this is just huge. These data brokers are where it all comes together. You see some lines between, I drew a spy on the right with the hat. We did not actually wear the hats in the office. But they actually also do business with the brokers. And they buy your data. Specifically, the Dutch government ruled in the law that the Dutch intelligence agencies are not only allowed to buy such grey data, they're actually encouraged to do it. So you may think, hey, I'm leaking to an advertiser. How bad is that? Well, you're actually leaking to a ton of governments as well. So what is in there? How big is that database? Oh, a little intermezzo. I had to put this in here because sometimes how does it work when the government shows up? Because if you have that database full of data about users, it can happen that the government shows up. They say, hey, you have the communications of this person is a suspect in a crime, hand it over. And at that point, whatever you have to hand it over. Interestingly enough, if you do not have data, you can say, yeah, I don't have it. And then the police people go away again. It's very nice. Not having data is a huge way to simplify this process. The problem is, once you have the data and they say you must give it to us, then it becomes very difficult not to give it to them. It involves a lot of lawyers and you'll likely lose. So this is the first hint of the message I want to give with this presentation. Think about what you have. That could be metadata that you have to give, like this person logs in from this IP address at these times using this username and they gave us this email address. Or it could be the whole thing. It could be that someone shows up and say, look, you run Dropbox here, give me the entire Dropbox of this person, give me all the email. It could be a lot. Civil lawsuits also happens, that someone shows up and say, hey, I'm having a lawsuit against this person and I think there is email evidence on your server. And again, You can be as privacy-minded as you want, but when the government shows up and says, look, we have a law that says that you need to give this to us, you need to give it to them. More interesting are the national security people. And every country has such an establishment, and they can actually show up and say, hey, give me like a lot of your data. Not from a specific person, but just give me everything that passes through this cable. And again, you have to give it to them. Or you have to have a very interesting lawsuit. This being Europe, these people are rather nice about it. They don't have guns. They only send you nasty letters if you do not cooperate. But in the end, they can order you to hand over that stuff. But again, you cannot give them what you do not have. So if you made sure that privacy details do not flow through your system, you can say, look, we don't have anything interesting. Which is again a reason to think real hard about what kind of data are we processing. Now at this point I want to make it clear, and we'll get to that later in the presentation as well, governments very often do reasonable investigations. And it can also suck if you say, well, I accidentally built a dark web site where people can trade drugs and there's nothing I can do to stop it. That might be okay if you consciously wanted to generate a dark website, but it's pretty bad if it happened by accident. So I'm not saying here that the government is always evil because they still pay my bills. No. I just genuinely believe that police and people should be able to do investigations, just not too much of it. But think about what you store. Think about what you have. Do you want to be that helpful? The final line is for a very specific reason. Sometimes the government shows up and they want things from a company, and they should actually be showing up to the board of directors. They should be showing up to the legal department. But that's difficult, and in many countries, police and agencies will actually try to just contact techies and say, can you give me the data? Do not ever do that. The only people that the government should be talking to is your legal department. And I've personally encountered individual system administrators that were handing over data to the government. And the interesting thing is, in the Netherlands, if you are handing over data to the government and you did not check if it was right for them to do that, you can go to jail. So if the government ever approaches you, immediately give them the phone number of your legal department and do not talk any further, because you're helping no one if you try to be friendly. So please keep that in mind. I do not want any of you to go to jail. So what kind of stuff do people collect? And I made a small list. And as I was making this presentation, this list came ever longer. You thought, well, why are people keeping track of how people walk? And it turns out that you can do health data from that and predict if someone will break their hip in the near future. So you can sort of fool yourself that it's a nice idea to log how people are walking. So people are logging this. And they are sending it like a torrent of telemetry is coming out of all apps and disappearing into these big databases. It includes stuff like air pressure. I thought, why is anyone first measuring air pressure and also storing it? Turns out it's one of the best ways of figuring out which floor of a building someone is on. So you can derive, you can also sell it as health data. Say, I detected that you walked up the flight of stairs. You can also use it to sell it while they went to the 3rd floor where they sell the expensive cars. So phones come with air pressure sensors. Not for your benefit, by the way, because they're not sharing that news with you. And whenever you study this, it is more than you thought. One of the problems as sort of technology people, when you want to focus on doing your job, you can a little bit fool yourself and say, well, I know we have this component from Facebook in there, but they're probably not logging too much. I have some very bad news. So it is, if you start looking at this network console from a browser, you will be astounded. If you manage to get an Android phone to log what it is sending, and that's not easy because the Android phone is trying very hard to not make you do that, but it is always more than you thought. I got a fun example. I spoke to some people in the car industry a few weeks ago, and they had an issue. They said, yeah, we log all kinds of telemetry from the car. So they didn't feel like they were spying on the user, they were like spying on the performance of the car. But they found out that they have this odometer that tracks how many kilometers your car drove, and they found that that odometer would often go backwards. That means that someone took their car and reversed the mileage so that they could sell it for more money. And now the car manufacturer knows that. And they said, yeah, now what? Do we warn people that they're buying a car that has actually driven 100,000 kilometers? We know that or not, or do we ignore that? And then they went on, they said, we also have data on the lane assist system, and that's actually always on, and that detects if you are sort of swerving on the road a little bit. And so, yeah, we see people that are clearly drunk driving every Friday. And we see that, we know that. And what do we do with that? These were people that were thinking about that. And that's nice and good, because that gives you an opportunity. But if you had not thought about that, you might already have been selling that data. Because that's one of the messages in this talk. All the data that you collect will eventually get sold. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually someone is buying that data and doing stuff with it. And they are not telling you. Which makes it all the more important to think about what kind of data am I collecting. This is a good one. This is good data. And I can understand why people track telemetry. This is from 4 days ago. Firefox started crashing for a lot of people. And from very specific people, a Debian-based distribution called Huaya. And because Mozilla and Firefox sent sufficient telemetry, they could figure out why it was happening. And it had to do with a bug caused by Google storing 2,000 cookies for a single lookup. See, cookies are bad. But in this case, they were storing so many cookies that they were causing a bug in the Linux kernel. But it's nice, they could figure this out within a day because they had all this telemetry. So I can understand that if you are a software developer and you think, hey, I'm going to store all kinds of metrics, because one day it's going to help me fix a bug. It's a very addictive thing to have. So you might be tempted to say, I'm going to log all the things. This is a worse example. This is one of the most important deep learning developers, and a great inspiration to the talk I held earlier today. And he noted that he had a popular Bluetooth car battery monitor that sent GPS, cell phone tower cell IDs, Wi-Fi beacon data to servers in Hong Kong. Why? Why did that happen? Why didn't no one stop it? If you look into that, you find out that first, no one was busy stopping such things. And secondly, people often don't know that it happens. So they use some kind of component which reports this stuff, and they use another component which reports some other stuff. And before you know it, you are just snitching everything from your users. And like I said before, quite a lot of evil happens by people not realizing they're doing any kind of evil. It's just the default. And that's one of the issues. The default in many of these frameworks is now to just log everything. Now, this is an example. It's not very well documented, but each time you log something because it's convenient, you might think, yeah, well, it's only one thing. So the company that made Angry Birds, they somehow logged the email of your phone, which is the hardware identifier of your phone. And they said, yeah, we do that to prevent cheating. It's a bit weird that they did that, but they did that for many years. I checked it this morning. In 2011, they were doing this. And then later it was found that they were transmitting that email data together with a bunch of other data over an unencrypted connection. Later, it turned out that that enabled a government to build a database of where everyone was in the world. Because 500 million people had installed Angry Birds, and they were all logging their details to this server. The Angry Bird people did not know they were at the core of a worldwide surveillance program. They thought they were at a bird game. And this was big. And that was all because they said, yeah, we're going to log the email in plain text and someone is going to snoop that. It is the combination of all these different things, the way people walk, the screen resolution, the air pressure where they are, how fast their car drives, that has now generated a complete view of everyone. And that view is generated by individual people logging the email so that we can prevent cheating. So this is sort of the chain of command. So we're thinking about the nuclear chain of command with these people in the nuclear bunkers. This is our chain of command. So eventually we type it in. And we do that because maybe a project manager says, look, we have the following requirements and you have to do this, okay? And that again came from a product manager that says this is where the product needs to go. And eventually it came from board shareholder people that just said maximize shareholder value. So this is the chain that goes from the top of the building to the keyboard where the typing happens. And you might feel like, look, what role do I have? Maybe you make a stamp collection app. Like, what is my role in this world? I'm not selling data. What do I have to do? And also, what room do I have to influence all this? My legal department should be looking out for this. The compliance department should be looking out for this. We should be doing audits on what the code is doing. And it turns out that the defaults that we pick as developer have a huge impact. Because it's not actually like this. It's more like this. At every layer, you event your own details on what to do. So the board says enhance shareholder value. And the director and product manager think about that. And the project manager says, well, can you create a scoreboard to this site? Because we think having a scoreboard to the Angry Birds app will really motivate people. Yeah, nice, I can do that. And then often there's a lot of freedom for individual developers to say, hey, I'm going to log the email because it's a nice way to keep the scoreboards fair. You have so much freedom in what you do because the instructions you get down from the directors are not very precise. That means that whenever you pick some defaults, you install a framework, you have the liberty to go through that framework and see what the parameters are and how much telemetry it is sending out. No one told you exactly what to do. If you write an app, then many apps would like to have as many permissions as possible so that they can grab as much data as they can. But no one really told you to do that often. So it is within the role of a developer to say, well, I'm going to pick the minimal permissions that I can get away with. And I'm not going to put a telemetry app from Meta in default mode where it stores everything. That big arrow downstairs is actually rather big. And that doesn't mean that you need to become an activist within your own company, your own personal GDPR compliance department. It just means maybe just not logging something, because no one asked you to do it. And there is a fairly large role there. Because what your app has no permission to see, it can also not accidentally collect. If you do collect the data because you happen to want to have the air pressure data for some reason in your game, well, you could just not collect it. Or if you collect it, you can make sure that you don't stream it into the cloud. And if you are responsible for the back end, you can also say, hey, we are not storing that data. We don't have a reason to store the air pressure. So let's just not do that. And if there is data that you really have to store for debugging purposes, then you can get away with saying, well, shall we only store that for like a week or something like that? So we can investigate incidents, but we don't run this echelon database of everyone's email communications for the past 5 years. So there is a lot more scope than you might think in your role as developers or even as product managers to say, well, shall we not accidentally start a huge data collection program? Because if we look at what apps are doing, either they are accidentally logging all the data or it was done on purpose. But I'm willing to bet that quite often it was just following the defaults. So it might be good to take a look at that as a developer. And many of these things are choices that actually you make from day to day, simply by sitting there and choosing, shall I just stream all the telemetry, or shall I have a good think about what I'm going to stream? Shall I ask for all the permissions because it might be useful later, or maybe not? So you have a lot of scope for influencing what your employer's software is doing. And the conservative defaults are sort of nice, because I want to emphasize a bit, how does that go? A company finds out they are logging lots of interesting data, First they ignore that for a bit, then there is a bad financial quarter. And everyone goes around and says, hey, we must make more money. And then people start asking, what data do we have? Can we sell that? And the interesting thing is people actually go and sell data for like 500 euros a month. It's very weird. There are organizations that should know better, but they're like, yeah, hey, we need to make the money. And it's best at that point when there is this money crunch that the data you are worried about is not actually there. But the time to make that happen, that the data was not there, was like a few months ago. So it matters what you do. Blah, blah, blah. Oh, and it's not just your company selling stuff. You might also get ransomware one day. Many companies actually do get ransomware these days. And again, at that point, there's a lot of data where you would be very happy for not having had it. Because if you are ransomware and your data is on the dark web, but the data is not interesting, it's a lot nicer than when you have all kinds of data that is interesting. So, governments. And governments do care about this subject, and they are writing laws about it. And this poor programmer sits in the middle, and all these countries or organizations are making laws that affect you. And interestingly enough, the EU and China, for example, are writing laws that are entirely opposite. And this is not really your work as programmers, because if you start reading all the legislation around the world, you would not get around to finding out about the latest JavaScript framework. But it's still something to be aware about. And one of the sort of funnier things is the new EU Cyber Resilience Act. And this act actually has a rule in there, E, that says that whatever you make, even the app must only process data that it actually has a use for. That means that if you do not want to log the air pressure or the Wi-Fi beacons or the Bluetooth beacons, you now actually have a way of saying, yeah, we cannot do that. Because since we are a bird app, and we do not actually have a reason to log the Bluetooth beacons, Article E says that we cannot do it. So sometimes when you are looking for reasons not to do things, the law can be helpful. Because also the EU has figured out that this is getting out of hand. It will, by the way, be 5 years before this law is active, sadly. And there are also bad things in there. It's not all good news. So the balance. Whatever you write, people will use your software for good things and for bad things. Maybe if you write Angry Bird, there is no bad use of it. I don't know. But in general, if you write a chat app, someone will use that chat app to organize a bank robbery. And of course, you are not personally responsible for what people type into your app. Do not understand me incorrectly in that way. But it might be that you have data that is useful for law enforcement. And for example, you can think about it if you do something with car sharing. It would be nice if you knew who drove what car when. Because if you would have said, yeah, we do not keep track of that, and there was a bank robbery using a car that you rented out, that's a bit sad, because then you generated an anonymous car service. And again, like accidentally creating a dark web store, you might not accidentally want to be creating an anonymous car renting service, because people are going to do great things with anonymous cars. So there is data where you'd say, yeah, it is maybe good to collect this stuff. And you can actually make it so good that you accidentally enter into a situation that can become painful. And this is, for example, what happened to Apple at some point. Apple at one point had added so much encryption to everything that even when the FBI came and said, look, we have this abduction case and you really must help us, Apple could credibly say, I cannot help you. I locked down the data so well that I cannot help you. And you can imagine how that feels. And also how the police will make use of that situation by getting big headlines written that says, well, because of Apple, this little girl died. That's not what you want. And it's actually a sort of impossible situation. Because next time round, okay, maybe you helped solve this little abduction, the little girl is fine now, And next up, it comes like, yeah, the police arrested 5,000 protesters against climate change. Thank you, Apple. That's also not feel good. And that's the part where that's why the title of this talk is "And You in the Middle," because these choices have to be made. The good news for us is that these difficult, these really hard choices about how well do you want to protect your users, these choices are typically made really high up in the building and not really by us. But still, it is good to think about it. Do I want this tool to be super perfect? Do I want to create this accidental dark web anonymous car rental service? Or do I want to create this government helping service that voluntarily keeps track of everyone and keeps notes that it should not be making? These are choices that are good to inform your senior management about and not make sure that you have to make these, to make sure that you do not have to make these choices. Because there is a problem here. We are not well equipped to think about this stuff. So the software people have big brains. They can learn all kinds of difficult things about Kubernetes. But the thing is, if you try to fit all of computing and all of societal knowledge and minority groups and laws and everything into your head, it is not a given that we are all ethics specialists. Because we're not. I'm also not an ethics specialist. But one danger is that we might not recognize that we're not experts here. And it has frequently happened that a group of developers set some defaults for tracking, which turn out to be very bad for people in an abusive relation. Because by default, the location sharing is on, that kind of stuff. Whereas anyone that has been through a nasty divorce would have said, let's not do the default sharing. But you have to have been through such a situation before you think about that. And as technical people, we are very often like, hey, I know how C++ works, so I also know ethics. It doesn't work like that. But there is a solution, and the main part that I'm hoping that you will not do, and I also have to tell myself this all the time, is sit behind your desk and reason it out as a geek. Because this is not geek world. These are consequences that are far bigger. So how do you learn about that stuff? Well, conferences. And there are lots of places like these. These are privacy organizations, these are civil rights organizations, and they have all kinds of fun events that you can just visit. Every country in the world has these people, except China. They should have had them before, is the point. And many of these organizations, you can just go there, they're fun people, they think about this stuff. And it's an easy way to expose yourself to a bit of thinking about, yeah, I'm writing this app and it is storing my user's pulse rate, and is that good? Should I not be doing that? Or I'm storing all these websites they visited in the last 15 minutes so I can help debug any JavaScript issues. And accidentally you built a complete surveillance tool. So this is the good kind of places to visit and yeah, marinate your brain a little bit in the thinking, is it good to log this stuff? Is it good to request this permission? Is it good to share this data with this partner where I don't actually know what they're doing with it, but I assume it is good? So by all means do visit these kinds of places. And I work with the Bits of Freedom people a lot, and they're extremely good. So some final notes. It's nice to live in a safe society, and it is so that the case that means that police and governments do need access to some data. So I'm not against that. There are these privacy people that would say, yeah, the governments never need any data because I read here that encryption has never been a problem in any investigation. You will still read that. Encryption is a problem in every investigation. It's very strange that people just write and say, no, it's never been a problem before. And that's just not the case. So the law enforcement people do need something. Think about the anonymous car renting service that we almost accidentally created. But handing out too much data is like really bad. And if you look around, especially in the network console tab of your browser, you can definitely say that we are handing out way, way, way too much data. Every time you look underneath there, it is worse than you thought. And I was already thinking pretty bad things. But by limiting how much data your apps and software sort of collect accidentally or by default, you can have an important role in restoring the balance. And be specifically wary of frameworks where you assume that they're not logging that much. See if you can just turn that down to 0. And of course, there is the risk that later on you miss some data. That you have a crash, you cannot resolve it, you have complaining users, but you cannot see which version of the software they are running, and that maybe it will hurt at one point. But try in your mind to balance the risk of saying, hey, yeah, maybe one day I'll have a harder time investigating a crash, or I handed over all my users' data to a data broker that is now selling it to the highest bidder. Because that's a key point. You do not see which parts of the data you collect get sold. That happens in a different part of the building, happens in a different company often even. Do not assume that it is good. Now, and educate yourself a little bit so you know who is at risk of data leaking and what the sort of right frame of mind it is. And the organizations on the previous slide are very good places to do that. And with that, I'd like to round it off with one last message. In this world, you have a real role to play in how much data gets collected, logged, stored, sold. And you have a role there, and please play it well. And with that, I would like to thank you for your attention.